Montana Territory, early spring of 1883. The snow was not yet finished falling, but the wind carried a promise of thaw. Kade Lachlan had just finished hitching the buckskin mare to the post when he saw her bare arms scratched, skirt torn at the hem, and eyes wide like a deer about to bolt. She came stumbling down the hill behind his cabin, half running, half falling through the brush. He stepped down from the porch before he even thought about it. She froze when she saw him. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "I just need to rest. I will not bring trouble." Her lip was bleeding. There were bruises on her arms. Kade's jaw clenched. He nodded once. "You are welcome here. Come inside." She hesitated, then followed him up the steps like she did not quite believe it. Inside, the cabin was warm from the fire he had stoked earlier. She glanced around, eyes darting to the rifle above the mantel, then to the coffee pot on the stove, then back to him. She looked ready to collapse. He poured her a cup of water and handed it to her without a word. She took it with both hands. "Thank you." He waited, then asked, "What is your name?" "Vera Zeller." She looked him square in the eye when she said it. There was pride there, buried under all the fear. He respected that. "I am Kade Lachlan." "Are you alone out here?" she asked. He nodded. "Been so for a few years now." She sipped the water, slower now. Her hands were trembling less. "I was in Miles City," she said. "Married a banker last spring, thought I was lucky." She paused. "Turned out he already had 2 children. He lied about everything." Kade did not interrupt. "He left me with them when he ran off a month ago, said he had business in Helena, never came back." She looked up, jaw tight. "Then his brother showed up, drunk, said I was his now. I took the children and left that night." Kade's brow furrowed. "Where are they?" She blinked, then covered her mouth. I had to leave them in a wagon with a kind old couple near Roundup. I could not outrun him with the little ones. I only meant to draw him off." She looked like she would break in half from the weight of it. "I will get them," Kade said, simple and sure. Vera stared at him like he had just promised her the world. "You do not even know me." "No, but I know a cornered woman when I see one, and I do not stand by for that." She stood suddenly, legs shaky. "I should go. I do not know what will happen if he finds me here." "You are safe now," Kade said, "and you are not leaving in this shape." She looked down at her scratched hands, then back up at him. Her eyes were green clear, even through the fear. "Why are you being kind?" Kade shrugged. "I saw you running like the world was on fire behind you, and when you looked at me just now, I saw something else, something worth fighting for." She blinked fast and turned away, but not before he saw the tear slip down her cheek. He gave her the extra room in the loft, brought up a basin of warm water and one of his clean shirts for her to sleep in. That night, she sat near the fireplace, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the flames. Kade sat nearby, oiling his rifle. "I never thought I would end up like this," she said. "No one does," he replied. She smiled, a tired, crooked thing. "You are not what I expected a cowboy to be." He raised an eyebrow. "What were you expecting?" "Less quiet, more proud." Kade looked into the fire. "Pride does not keep you warm at night. Kindness does." The crack of the fire filled the space between them. She whispered, "I did not want to be saved, but I think I needed it." Kade looked at her then, really looked. Not the bruises or the torn dress, but her. "I did not mean to open my door to any future," he said. "But then I saw you." She met his gaze, her eyes softened. "I think I would like to stay, just until I get the children back." He nodded. "Then we will get them together." And for the first time since she had run, Vera let out a breath that did not tremble. The next morning, ice still clung to the edge of the eaves, but the sun had begun to stretch longer across the valley floor. Kade stepped out early, boots crunching over the packed snow, and fetched water from the stream that cut behind the barn. When he returned, Vera was already up, sleeves rolled past her elbows, quietly sweeping the hearth with a bundle of willow twigs she must have found stacked behind the door. She didn't look up when he came in. "You had a mouse get bold in the night," she said. "Left a trail of flour across the planks." Kade set the water down and leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. "Bold mouse coming into a stranger's home without invitation." Her hands paused on the broom. Some things don't wait to be asked, they just go where they have to. He didn't answer that. Instead, he pointed toward the stove. Coffee's not on yet. She nodded and moved to light the flame beneath the kettle. Her movements were practiced, quiet, like someone used to making herself small in other people's kitchens. He watched the way her fingers settled on the tin of grounds, steady now, no longer trembling. "I'll ride out in an hour," he said. "You remember the couple you left the children with? They had a wagon with green canvas and a mule with a white blaze. She wore spectacles and he had a limp. They said they were headed south, looking for her sister's place outside Lavina." Kade nodded. "I know the trail. If they stuck close to the river bend, I might catch them by dusk." Vera turned from the stove. "You don't owe me this." "I don't recall saying I did." Her eyes searched his face. "What do you want in return?" Kade straightened. "Nothing you haven't already given." She looked away then, folding her arms. "I'm not used to men who do things without cost." "Then maybe it's time you met one." He left her to the fire and walked out to saddle the mare. By the time he returned, she'd packed a parcel of food, some dried meat, 2 biscuits, and the last of the apple preserves from the cellar jar. She handed it to him without a word, though her eyes lingered on his coat buttons as she did. He took it gently, careful not to brush her fingers. "I'll ride fast," he said. She stepped back, arms around herself. "I'll watch the ridge, just in case." He gave a short nod and turned toward the path that cut through the trees. She stayed at the edge of the porch until the sound of hooves faded into the timber. The day passed quiet. Vera washed what linens she could find, hung them heavy and dripping over the fence rails. She walked the perimeter of the cabin twice, memorizing the way the land sloped, the places brush grew thickest, and where the shadows fell longest. When she came back inside, she found a small cedar drawer in the corner, unlocked. Inside were coins, a rusted compass, and a folded letter, edges soft with age, ink faded. She didn't touch it. Instead, she closed the drawer and stepped away. Some things, no matter how kindly offered, weren't meant to be read by borrowed eyes. By sundown, she was pacing. She didn't light the lantern, kept the fire low. At dusk, she heard hoofbeats again, not hurried, but steady, deliberate. She stepped out, heart clawing at her ribs. Kade rode slow up the path, the children in front of him, 2 small shapes wrapped in blankets, their faces turned into his coat. Vera ran to them, catching the boy first, then the girl, folding them into her arms without a word. They clung to her, burying their faces in her neck. Kade dismounted and stood back, giving them space. The girl reached out and touched his hand once before hiding her face again. Inside, Vera settled them onto the cot near the fire and whispered to them until their breathing slowed. Then she stood and turned to Kade. "They remembered me," she said, voice tight, "even after all that. You're not easy to forget." She crossed the room, stopped a pace away from him. "They asked if you were an angel." He looked past her into the firelight. "What did you tell them?" "That angels don't wear dust and leather." He gave a low huff of breath. "They don't usually carry rifles either." She stepped closer. "Why did you really go find them?" "Because I wanted to see your face when you got them back." She didn't touch him, but her eyes held his. "I don't know what happens next." "We don't have to know, not yet." He picked up a blanket and moved to the floor beside the hearth, laying out his bedroll. She watched him settle in, then turned down the lantern. Outside, the wind had stilled. The night held its breath. Inside, with her children safe and his quiet strength beside them, Vera finally let her guard slip. Not all the way, but enough. Enough to fall asleep with her hand resting on her son's hair, and her feet angled toward the warmth of a man who had opened his door and never asked her to repay him for it. By the time the creek thawed and the cottonwoods began to bud, the children had found their rhythm in the cabin. Miriam, the younger, liked to sit on the porch rail and count the birds that landed on the fence posts. Thomas, older by a year, followed Kade when he did the morning chores, not speaking much but watching everything. Vera had taken to rising early again, her hair braided down her back, her days given over to mending, tending, and each quiet thing that made a home feel less borrowed. One afternoon, While the wind carried the scent of wet earth and pine sap, Kade returned from the far pasture with an armload of fence rails. He found her in the lean-to behind the barn, sleeves rolled, sleeves rolled, sleeves rolled, sleeves rolled, hands sunk deep in a basin of soapy water. "You've been out here a while," she wrung out a shirt, not looking up. "It's the only time I don't hear what he said to me, or the sound of the door slamming when he left." Kade set the rails down gently. "You shouldn't have had to carry that alone. I didn't mean to bring it here. You didn't. You brought yourself," he waited, "and I like who you are." She wiped her hands on her skirt and finally met his eyes. "You say that like you've known me longer than a winter month. I've seen enough to know what's true." She stepped closer and leaned against the post, arms crossed over her chest. "You don't ask questions the way most men do. You just wait. I figure folks talk when they're ready." Vera tilted her head, expression unreadable. "I was 16 the first time I left home, thought I knew what I was running toward, didn't realize I was just running from silence. My father never spoke unless he had a Bible in hand, and my mother only cried when she thought no one could hear." Kade shifted his weight. "That why you don't scare easy?" "I scare plenty, I just don't show it," he nodded once. "That's honest." She looked toward the woods. "I thought if I could just be good enough, quiet enough, someone might stay. That banker saw a woman who wouldn't argue, I let him." "That's not who you are now." "No. It isn't." Behind them, the children's laughter rang from inside the barn, Thomas trying to teach Miriam how to balance on a hay bale. Vera closed her eyes for a moment. "I keep waiting for the weight of everything to come down on me again. For someone to knock at the door and say I don't belong here." Kade's voice was soft. "What if I told you you already do?" She opened her eyes, studied him. "You'd mean it." "I would." She looked down at her hands. "I keep waking in the night and thinking it's all borrowed time. That nothing this steady can last." Kade stepped closer. "It can if we build it right." Her gaze lifted. "How do you build something like that? One beam at a time, one day, one truth." She reached out, fingers brushing his sleeve. "And if I don't know how to love without flinching," he didn't move, didn't reach for her, "then I'll wait until you can." The sun dipped low, casting the barn in long shadows. A bird called from the tree line, sharp and bright. The wind shifted, warm now, tugging at the hem of her skirt. Vera looked up at him, her eyes steady. "I don't want to be afraid anymore, you're not." "Not with you," she whispered. He nodded just once. "Then stay, not because you need to, but because you want to." She didn't answer right away. But when she turned toward the house, her hand slid into his, fingers lacing slow and certain, and for the first time in a long season, neither of them looked back. The first hard rains came in mid-April. The roof held, but the earth turned soft and untrustworthy underfoot, and the river swelled with snowmelt. Kade spent most of the week checking fence lines and hauling in firewood, boots caked in red mud by the end of every day. Vera kept the children close, teaching Miriam her letters by oil lamp and showing Thomas how to trim kindling with the small knife Kade had dulled for safety. One evening, after the children had curled up under their quilt, Vera stepped outside. The clouds had scattered, leaving the stars raw and sharp above the ridge. Kade was seated on the chopping block, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the dark edge of the pines. She walked toward him slowly, her shawl tight around her shoulders. "You've been quiet all day, just thinking." She stopped beside him. "About what?" He looked up. "About what comes next." She sank to sit on the stump across from him. "You thinking of moving on?" "No." He met her eyes. "I was wondering if you'd want to stay past spring." She didn't answer right away. The night air still held a bite, but she didn't flinch from it. "I don't have anything to go back to." "That's not the same as choosing to stay." Vera drew a breath, eyes on the soft glow in the cabin window. "I used to think a house was only walls, that safety was just luck. But this," she paused, "this feels like something we built, not something I stumbled into." Kade's voice was low. "You didn't stumble. You walked straight through the worst of it and kept going." She looked down at her hands. "I've been learning how to live without waiting for something to fall apart." You're not the only one. They sat in silence a long moment. Then she said, Thomas asked me if he could call you something besides Mr. Lachlan. He smiled, just barely. What you say? I told him you'd want to hear it from him, not me. I would. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of wet pine. Vera stood and crossed to the porch, her hand trailing along the railing. I've never planted anything, she said over her shoulder. Never stayed long enough. You could. There's space beyond the barn, good light, I can turn the soil. She turned back to him, half in shadow. If I plant something, it means I believe it'll still be here come August. Maybe it will be. She stepped inside, leaving the door open behind her. The next morning, Kade rose early and hitched the team to the plow. By midday, he'd turned a patch near the back fence, the soil dark and rich where the old grass had been. Vera came out with a sack of seed wrapped in a flour sack, beans, onions, even a handful of flower bulbs she'd found buried in the bottom of a forgotten crate. She knelt beside the furrows without speaking, pressing each seed into the earth with care. Kade worked beside her, sleeves rolled, sweat at his brow. They moved in rhythm, no need for words. Later, as the sun sank low, she brushed dirt from her palms and looked out across the rows. This is the first thing I've ever put in the ground without fear. Kade leaned on the shovel. Then we'll keep tending it. She looked up at him, her voice quiet. You ever think about what you'll be doing 5 years from now, sometimes? And what do you see? He didn't hesitate. You, the children, a porch with a rocking chair. A field full of things we planted ourselves. She stepped closer. You sure? I've never been more. She reached for his hand, fingers threading through his, not tentative now, but certain. Then I think I'd like to see what this becomes. Their joined hands hung between them, not rushed, not desperate, just rooted, like something that had been growing slow and steady all along. And behind them, in the soft earth, the first garden rose lay waiting, ready to take hold. By late May, the soil had settled, and the first shoots had broken through pale green threads rising from the earth. Vera knelt in the rows each morning, fingers coaxing weeds from the roots, sleeves damp with dew. The children helped where they could, Thomas careful with the watering can, Miriam more interested in naming each sprout than tending it. Kade had added a low fence to keep the mule from wandering through, and when the evenings turned warm enough, they sometimes ate outside on the ground, backs against the barn wall, plates balanced on their knees. One night, after the children had fallen asleep beneath the quilt Vera had pieced from old shirts and flour sacks, she stepped out to find Kade working by lantern light, sharpening a drawknife on the porch bench. She sat beside him, watching the blade catch firelight. You always have to be working. He didn't look up. I like the quiet, but I never did know how to be still in it. You don't have to fill it for me. He stopped, set the blade aside. It's not for you, I think it's just how I carry the past. She folded her arms across her stomach. You never talk about what came before. He rested his elbows on his knees, voice low. There was a time I rode with a trail crew out of Cheyenne, freight runs, fence contracts, even some bounty work when coin was lean. I didn't sleep much back then. Too many names in my head I couldn't forget, she tilted her head. What made you stop? There was a boy, barely old enough to shave, took a shot at me outside a barn in Judith Basin, missed by inches. I tied him up and rode him back into town. He cried the whole way. Said he thought I was the man who'd hurt his sister. Vera waited. I looked at him and saw myself, just younger and angrier. He laced his fingers together. When I handed him over, I knew I was done, turned west and bought this land with what I had. She laid her palm over his. You could have kept running. I didn't want to, not anymore. The lantern hissed between them, wick low. I used to think I had to be alone, he said, to keep people safe from what I've seen, but that isn't living, that's hiding. She leaned into him, shoulder brushing his. I've spent years thinking love had to feel like proving something or surviving something. He turned toward her. And now I think it might feel like this. Her voice steadied. Like quiet that doesn't ask anything of me. He reached up, fingers brushing a loose strand behind her ear. I never imagined a life where I'd want to come home to someone, but I do now. She didn't look away. Then ask me, he held her gaze. Will you marry me, Vera? She smiled, slow and sure. Yes. I will. They married beneath the cottonwoods 2 weeks later, with the children standing beside them and the scent of lilac in the air. Thomas wore Kade's spare vest, the shoulders too wide, and Miriam carried a bouquet of wild lupine tied with twine. The woman from the trading post came to witness, and her husband offered a prayer that was short and kind. Vera wore a dress dyed soft blue with indigo, the hem stitched with care. Her hair was braided, pinned with the silver comb Kade had traded for in Billings the week before. She didn't cry, not until Kade took her hands and said, "You are the first thing that ever made me believe in staying." They built a larger table that summer, one that fit them all without elbows knocking. Vera taught Thomas to read from the newspaper scraps Kade brought back from town, and Miriam began leaving flowers on the window ledge, one every morning before breakfast. Kade added a second room to the cabin, and when the first frost came, they had enough jars put up to last the winter twice over. In the evenings, when the fire crackled low and the children slept, Kade would sit in the rocker he'd carved from cedar and watch Vera sew by lamplight. Her face was softer now, her laughter easier. She didn't flinch when someone knocked, and she no longer looked over her shoulder when she stepped outside. He kissed her once each night before they turned down the lamp. Not because it was expected, but because he couldn't help it. Years passed, and the land grew with them. The garden widened. A second child came, a boy with Kade's brow and Vera's eyes, born in late autumn with the snow just starting to fall. They named him Elias, and Thomas held him first, hands careful, proud. Nothing grand ever happened after that. No telegrams, no strangers arriving with old debts. Just seasons and growth, and love that deepened like roots beneath the frost line. And every morning, before the sun crested the ridge, Vera would step out onto the porch with her shawl wrapped tight, and Kade would join her, arm around her shoulder, the day unfolding slow and certain in front of them.